Hello fellow YouTubers. Today's Friday. It's September 7, or in Roman numerals V2. Right. It's been an overcast sort of day. It's been quite warm actually. You can see I'm not even wearing a cardigan, but I have got a different shirt on, and it's quite a warm shirt. Because the t-shirts I wear around here are only when I'm working in the backyard and that, because they're full of holes. But they're good when I've got jobs to do, and if I'm doing some metal work, I can just put an apron over the holey t-shirts. But I couldn't go down to Bunnings. Yes, I had to go down to Bunnings because the wire strand I put up from across the yard to tie up the salon shade that had over my wife's back garden plants broke through the night. I didn't notice until late this afternoon. Just happened to I spy and thought, oh, there we go. So I had to go down and buy some more wire rope, 3mm galvanised rope. This won't break, and the little thingamajigs that you do it up with. And that's why I'm a bit sore in the back, because I was working overhead. Oof. Well, I hope that's what it is. So I haven't got anything else really to go on about. I could go on about a lot of things, let me assure you that, but I'm going to get stuck into the reading because Sally wants to hear what else, well, what we burnt. It was rather common. It sounded there's like a little bit of innuendo there. I don't know if she meant that or not, but anyhow, I will continue with Bonfire Night, 1958. On the Saturday night of the June long weekend, sometime not long after dinner, and at a time we would have normally had a shower, only our sister bathed now, we were able to have a shower, Rich and I were scrutinising our individual bag of fireworks, just one last time, before heading outside for the night of nights. We had done so countless times during the course of the past few weeks, for no other reason than to look, feel, smell, and reassure ourselves that all was there as it had and should be. And perhaps expecting, and like it is when you keep opening the refrigerator door every 5 minutes, that something extra might be there that wasn't there before, even though you knew there wouldn't be. So Wendy was looking at her bag too. That was our sister's name. Oh, you probably guessed that. Not that she was particularly interested as to what the contents were, but rather a simple matter of monkey see, monkey do. But where her bag only contained, in her words, pretty things. Only pretty things, Mummy and Daddy. Only pretty things. Nothing that goes bang. Our bags were all but chock-a-block full of noisemakers. We had a few skyrockets and an assortment of sputtering candles and several packets of sparklers. But it was the greater majority of other things that took pride of place. There were strings of Tom Thumbs, tiny little things that had a habit of working loose and finding their way to, and scattering helter-skelter about the bottom of the bag. But that was okay. We would simply gather them up by the handful and toss them into the fire. Likewise strings of jumping jacks, about 1.5 inches long and HB pencil thick. We had carefully separated them in order to extend their use, rather than watch them, as the name suggested, jump about on the ground and be gone in a cacophony of noise and smoke in a matter of seconds. Scores of penny bungers, the mainstay of any boy's powder keg, and outnumbering any other cracker by 20 to 1. 2 inches long and ring finger thick, they housed more than enough punch to send an empty can 20 feet into the air. Blow apart empty bottles, bulge letterboxes, and when snugly placed into a length of hollow metal tube, shoot a marble with such force, it would penetrate 4-ply from 10 yards. And of course, they made a lot of noise, too. Then there were threepenny bungers. See, this is in the old pound, shillings and pence days. Threepenny. They were twice as long but a tad thicker than a penny bunger. And when they went off, the sheer force of the explosion was like a sonic boom. The noise making your ears ring and the sound resonating like an echo for several seconds after the event. Whatever a penny bunger could do, they could do it a whole lot better. But unfortunately, we could never find a tube that could accommodate them in order to test their real power. For we reckon they had the potential to shoot a marble through just about anything. But as disappointed as we were, it was probably a good thing. Because I doubt if any of us would have been game or stupid enough to hold whatever contraption we might have come up with to fire it in the first place. I separated, so I'm just peeling off the pages. But even they had to take back seat to the biggest of them all. The most imposing. The most awesome. The grand poopah. The be-all and end-all. The absolute mother of all bungers. The sixpenny. 6 inches long and 1 inch in diameter. It was a wonder you didn't need a special license in order to purchase. for it looked more like a stick of high explosive than a mere bunger. And you didn't waste it either. Didn't just light the fuse and casually lob it onto the ground and wait for the almighty thumping bang. Where was the fun in that? Why, just holding one of those things was enough to get your pulse and mind racing. Thinking about what there might be around you could blow to smithereens without falling foul of the neighbours. After all, that's what they were meant for, weren't they? To be able to stand well back, fingers plugging both ears, heart thumping in your chest, watching and waiting with bated breath for that colossal cracker to unleash its enormous power, and rend whatever it was to a shadow of its former self. Letterboxes were always a prime target for demolition, but only by the groups of itinerant louts who wandered the streets late at night, totally obliterating what was often someone's out of the ordinary creation and scaring the living daylights out of all and sundry into the bargain. Bulging a letterbox or popping its lid with a penny bunger was one thing. We'd get away with that. But blowing at the kingdom come, well, that was an entirely different thing altogether, and we knew it. As we made our way to the bonfire, Mum and Dad had reminded Richard and me for the umpteenth time that they wouldn't tolerate any silly behaviour. Otherwise the night we had planned for so long would be over and done with quick smart. No ands, ifs, or buts. Yes, Mum. Yes, Dad. Little did we know there would be one person there that night who would indulge in puerile acts of silliness. And it wouldn't be any of the children, but rather from someone who should have known better. An adult. Mr. Sutton, Peter's father. He was one of 11 adults and 13 children that had gathered for that night of the inaugural bonfire, representing a full complement of the families Webster, Baldwin, Sutton, Jameson, Flanders, and the Quartermans. But all of the mums and dads present, he was the only one who had of his own personal supply of penny bungers. The 2 pockets of his trousers bulging with them, as a matter of fact. I don't think any of us knew that at the time, nor would we have cared if we had. It was just the way he decided to use some of them as the night progressed. that had people, literally, jumping about. I was a little surprised to see him there, considering he tended to be somewhat of a reclusive individual. But I guess he had decided it was something he just didn't want to miss out on. And while he was there, he was going to make some noise of his own. And the noise had already started. Since early afternoon, the normal silence of the area had well and truly been invaded by the constant din of pops from afar and the bangs and thumps from nearby. Like opposing artillery and small arms fire that, when night descended, sounded more like major confrontations on countless battlefronts. By the time Richard Hadley, Peter and I touched their flaming medieval-like torches to the bonfire, the air was not only heavily shrouded with smoke with the slightly acrid smell of sulphur, but alive with the incessant barking, howling, yapping and whining from the entire canine population, both near and far. Dad had placed Timmy, our cat, in the laundry for the night. Said he didn't want him cowering under the house, scared out of his wits with the noise and smell of smoke. Sensitive in ears and noses, he had said. Why, I'd bet London to a brick. Dad often said that. That for every dog you hear voicing its discontent, there's another dog under a house in its kennel cringing and whimpering with fear. He was right, of course. But then he was always right when it came to animals. Always caring and considerate. A real softy when it came to all creatures, great and small. That's why the three of us were then and would always be the same. Dad wouldn't have had it any other way. But while I could feel empathy for the dogs as I stood before the bonfire, I also found it easy to dismiss their cacophony of noise, casting it aside and losing myself to the magic of the flames. And I wasn't the only one. To any passers-by it might have looked like a funeral pyre, with a peaceful gathering of mourners, their faces aglow, standing still and staring with intent, while just in front of them were the four guardians of the flames, bearers of and holding their flaming torches at arm's length, and high above their heads as if offering a final salute. The flames had been tentative at first, as if feeling their way, creeping sideways and upwards with an intermittent burst of yellow, orange, blue, green and red flame, casting aside as their intensity increased a myriad of fine black ash, the wisping remnants of paper and cardboard that rode the thermal draughts skywards in a frenzy of twists and turns. With every passing moment the flames grew and changed shape, a metamorphic kaleidoscope of colour and form that continued to cast a spell over all that looked on, captivating, enchanting, a truly wondrous thing. Simple things. What is it about fire? Why does it mesmerise? Why do we see things that aren't really there? Was it a figment of my imagination or an hypnotic illusion that the flames seemed to beckon, reaching out and up, then drawing back? Come closer, come closer. Then the flames would surge and the heat would say something else. Move away, ebbing and flowing, closer and away. Then the first bunger went off, then another and another in quick succession, the noise catching people unawares and releasing the hold as heads turned in a flurry of activity to see who had been the instigator or the perpetrator, by the momentary look of disdain on some of their faces. It had been Mr. Sutton. And when the moment passed and those faces smiled, and the squeals and giggles from the girls and vociferous yells of approval from the boys abated, the sight turned into a beehive of activity, The time had come, the walrus said, for the fun to begin. And it had begun, in between a series of 3 synchronisations of movement. Never before had I seen so many people doing exactly the same thing at exactly the same time outside the spectacle of the annual Anzac Day March. First had been the movement of all heads turning when Mr. Sutton exploded his bungers, like the gaping-mouthed clowns in Sideshow Alley. Next was the mass exodus from the rising heat of the flames, as 24 pairs of legs backstepped in shuffling unison, as if prompted and under control of one mind. Then the instantaneous reaction of those heads rose, and 24 pairs of hands shielded 24 pairs of eyes, as they watched thousands of glowing embers rise into the night sky when the entire structure of the bonfire abruptly settled. Wow! They were brief moments in time that were hilarious, but I didn't know it then, only in spontaneous, unbidden retrospect. We all have similar experiences from time to time, sights and images that have been photographed, processed, and stored deep inside our subconscious, that we didn't know existed until, suddenly, days, weeks, or even months later, for no apparent reason, break through the darkest depths of the id and explode into our unsuspecting conscious mind with such clarity that we erupt into unabated riotous laughter, often when there are people about us who haven't got a clue as to what we find so goddamn funny. Then there are the things that really crack you up the instant they happen. Like the look on my brother's face when he lit the fuse of one particular petty bunger. A long fuse. A fuse so long it drooped. A fuse he thought and indeed expected would, when alight, give him more than enough time to cock his arm and throw that bunger high into the sky before it exploded. But it didn't. Instead, that fuse burned so quickly, with such astonishing speed, like the foot from Hadley's puffer, that he just managed to drop it and jump back all in one movement before it hit the ground. And nothing. It was a dud. But it scared the living daylights out of him nonetheless. He didn't think it was amusing at all. Not the least bit funny. But I laughed so hard I thought I might piss myself. They had a tendency to do that from time to time. But then all fireworks had a nuance of unpredictability about them. Not an exacting science, you might say. After a few close calls, we were able to pick those that were a little iffy. Not always, but most of the time. Any bunger that had a frayed, lifeless and without substance fuse, like a strand of cooked spaghetti, was always a prime suspect. A warning to proceed with caution. It wasn't foolproof, of course, nor was it a dead set certainty that any of the other fuses wouldn't turn around and try to bite you just because they were standing erect and were somewhat solid to the touch. Sometimes those look real good, I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever. No need to worry, fuses. Just happen to contain dry powder that burn quicker than the speed of light. And they were never duds. Oh no. But even though we all seem to be blessed with better than warp speed reflexes that always saved our bacon, we never dared to challenge those reflexes against any of the duds, for they would have been like jumping from the frying pan into the fire. We called them duds, but they're only duds inasmuch that the fuse stopped burning about 1/16 of an inch short of the charge. And with a mere whisker of a fuse like that, there was only one of 3 things you could do. 4 if you decided to just leave it lying on the ground. But somehow that thought just didn't enter our heads. We could light the fuse with a sparkler or a burning taper. Throw it into the fire and be done with it without any fooling around. Or stockpile them. We tended to go for option 3. Why? I'll tell you about that shortly. When it came to the other fireworks, it was only the small skyrockets that had quick fuses. They came bundled together in lots of half a dozen wrapped in clear cellophane and cost 9p, maybe a shilling for 6. They looked like a penny bunger wrapped in colourful paper that had been taped to a stick. And the only redeeming feature about them at all was, at 1 1/2 or 2 pennies each, they were cheap. And because they were cheap, it was obvious to all those who lighted them that the fuse was so keen to get the show on the road that, more often than not, it would burn with such lightning speed that the life of the rocket was over and done with before you knew what had happened. From ignition, blast off a show of weak orange sparks, up and down all in a matter of seconds. The time it took for the lighter, or should it be the lightee, to rapidly turn side on, lean and shield their face. Gone and quickly forgotten. Next. But even though the others, the larger and more expensive skyrockets, and the colourful fountains and candles did have a fuse passé, their fantail-like paper wicks that ended with a twist could also leave you guessing on occasions too. And it wasn't the speed of the burn that had you concerned, but rather how slow. So slow and methodical at times that you weren't sure if the damn things had gone out or not, leaving you in two minds as to what you should do. But there were 2 other things that compounded the problem. The habit of all those wicks to burn with barely a hint of flame and smoke, and the light from the bonfire. It had changed an area the size of a football field into a surreal world of bright flickering light and enormous dancing shadows. And everywhere you looked, everything had changed colour, like litmus paper when exposed to an acid or an alkali. The red of the bungers was grey, and the blue wicks were blackish. And because there was always a tail of fine black ash, it was all but impossible to tell with any degree of certainty either way. So there you would stand, patiently waiting and waiting and waiting, not sure if the tail of ash was getting longer or not. And because you weren't sure, you would decide to wait a little longer just in case. And when you had finally all but convinced yourself that it hadn't, you would then throw caution to the wind and relight it. And we were never disappointed. From the smallest to the largest, the weight and expectation of those vagaries always rewarded with spectacular displays of sight and sound that delighted the young and the young at heart. Simple things. Whew. There's a lot more about that, but I've been going now for quite some time, over 20 minutes. And I don't want to make the reading too long because I think people tend to get bored. So I'll call it quits. I want to thank you for watching. Pardon me. It's a gas. And have a good weekend. And until next time, bye for now. Oh.